welcome, Chief Newsham. This is Pastor Oliver Bowie, and I'm one of the co-chairs on the De-Escalation bill that we're pushing, and also as we partner with Black Women for Positive Change. We want to thank you so much for coming on and joining us, and we also want to thank you for all of the great work that you and your department do every day, and we want you to know that we are so proud of those who continue to put their life on the line, who's on the front line. And we value what you're doing. And we're here to support you and look forward to partnering with you and how we can do things better as we move forward. I'm not going to delay any more time because I'm looking to hear from you as you come to present on the de-escalation and the importance of it. And also, I understand that you have brought also a very important piece in review as we look to stigmatize violence. So without any further delay, well, before I do that, I want you to know who's on the call. I think that's what I need to do. I want those of us to just give our names, where we're from, and then after that, I'll turn it over to the chief, and he will give his presentation this evening. So I've started with Dr. Stephanie Myers, where you introduce yourself, and then after that, we'll go in order. God bless you.
All right,
okay, thank you, Reverend Bowie. And Reverend Bowie's from Los Angeles, California, Chief Newsham. But thank you so much for being with us this evening. We really appreciate that. And we know that you've been at all kinds of funeral services these last few weeks. And so we appreciate your caring for the officers in D.C. and being with them as they're losing their loved ones. So I'm Dr. Stephanie Myers here in Washington, D.C.
Reverend Barbara Reynolds in Upper Marlboro, Maryland.
Next.
Next.
I'm sorry.
Oops. Go ahead.
This is Nikki Miles in Pittsburgh.
DG?
Oh, I apologize. This is DG Mon with the National Association of Community Mediation, and I'm based in Louisville, Kentucky.
Diane?
Diane Wood in Alexandria, Virginia.
Danielle?
Danielle Smith, Baltimore, Maryland.
Alexandra?
Alejandra Ivanovich from Baltimore, Maryland.
Henry Joseph?
Henry Joseph, Washington, D.C.
Okay. I think that's it for now, Reverend Bowie.
Okay, Chief, it's all yours.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you all very much for taking the time to listen. I will talk briefly. First of all, it's great to have folks from all over the country and on the call. It's nice to have some folks from the region, but to see that we're all the way over to the West Coast is fantastic because it's a really important issue. I'll start talking just a little bit about this COVID-19 because I think it's on all of our minds. As you know, we're all being impacted differently. Fortunately, in Washington, D.C., and I say fortunately, only 89 of our officers have tested positive. So for a force of our size, it has not impacted staffing. So we're able to provide police services to the city, which I'm very thankful for. Dr. Myers mentioned the fact that unfortunately and coincidentally and very suddenly, in the last 2 weeks, we lost two of our veteran sergeants. One was a 23-year veteran, and the other was a 30-year veteran. And neither one of those cases, interestingly, was COVID-19 related, but they were both on duty at the time. They both suffered medical emergencies, and we lost them. So it was a very sad time, and I thank you, Dr. Myers, for mentioning that. With regards to stigmatizing violence, which one of the things that's interesting to note about this COVID-19, at least in Washington, D.C., we've seen some pretty dramatic drops in crime in the city. Particularly our property crime has gone down, but our shootings have not gone down. Our shootings have remained pretty constant through this. Over the last couple of years in Washington, D.C., we've actually had very, very high rates of homicides. And most of our homicides, 80% of our homicides involve firearms. Dr. Myers and I were talking about this violence. And if you look at the individual cases, the violence is really senseless. And we were having a discussion, Dr. Myers and I, and what would be the best way collectively that we could approach this and maybe get some leverage to change the behavior. And Dr. Myers told me about a lot of the efforts that are going on for developing de-escalation techniques, particularly amongst our young people. And I think that is an excellent idea. I think to the extent that we can teach our folks, our young kids in particular, to resolve disputes without resorting to violence, that's going to be beneficial. But the other thing that came up in our conversation, I think we both thought this was something to pursue, is the idea of stigmatizing the use of guns at all. What our young people are seeing today is they're seeing more and more, and this has been going on for a long time, actually the glamorization of carrying a firearm. The movies that are out there, a lot of the video games that are out there, some of the music that is out there, all points to making the carrying of an illegal firearm glamorous. And I think that the way that you combat that is that you have to stigmatize the behavior. And I don't think we have the power to create, to change the momentum that's out there with regards to these movies and video games. I think that would be astronomical. But I do think that tapping into the peer pressure that can be applied by young people on each other, I think that's a very powerful force in potentially changing behavior. And so then the question would be, well, how the heck do you go about doing that? And I think you have to do something, and this is just some thoughts that I'm throwing out there. I think you have to do something with young people at a very early age and point out to them that this carrying a firearm thing has real world consequences where real people die. And it could be one of your loved ones, because a bullet, particularly a bullet in a city like ours, and I know Baltimore and LA are very similar. We have cities that have, hundreds of thousands of people in a very, very small area. Once that bullet leaves a gun, it doesn't have a name on it. When that bullet leaves a gun, everybody's in jeopardy. So I think that, I'll throw this out as a thought. You can tell me how you feel about it. If somehow we could get some public information, get some training for our young people, the thing that I would, say that we could use as an example of success where stigmatizing behavior worked very well in our country was with driving under the influence of alcohol. If you remember back, I'd say 25, 30 years ago, it really wasn't considered to be that big of a deal to have a couple of drinks and get behind the wheel of a car. But nowadays, if you do that, most people look at you like, what in the world are you doing? What are you thinking? That behavior has been stigmatized. I think if we can stigmatize that behavior with our young people in the carrying of these illegal firearms, I think we can have some success. So I will stop there and let any of you throw out any suggestions or ideas you might have regarding that.
This is Barbara Reynolds asking you, Chief. When I think about it, I'd like to see how in the world do we do this, because if funerals is not enough stigmatization, if not hearing about your friends being killed, it seems like it would be inbred stigmatizing. So, I mean, how do you make something not cool? I guess it's horrible. It's already horrible.
Reverend Reynolds, let me interrupt you just for a second. We can hear some background noise from someone on the line. Please mute your phone. Please mute your phone. Okay, I'm sorry, Reverend Reynolds. Please go on.
That's Chief. You understand my question? Steve?
I do. I think you're right, and I don't think this is going to be an easy task. So I'm not sure our young people are equating that death with the carrying of the firearm. I think when they see what they see in the movies and they hear what they hear in some of the music, they go out there and they're like, oh, well, I want to carry a gun too, and they're not thinking far enough ahead as to what the result of that will be. And then I think when you get into the stage where you're going to a friend's funeral or family member's funeral who's died as a result of gun violence, I think your mind is somewhere else. I think your mind is on that loss, the grief, but I don't know if they're really tying the two together. At least that's my sense.
Mm-mm.
Hi, this is Danielle Smith. So can I say something in regard to that from the young people that I have talked to, seen, and even some family members who live in the inner cities? I think one of the reasons they don't see it as being stigmatized is because they are using it as protection. They're using it as protection because of the area and environment that they're in where they grow up. Also, some of them who are part of the, quote unquote gangs, they use it, make sure they have on them for revenge and also for payback. Some of them even go to the funerals just to take out the people who took out their friends or their gang member. I mean, I even had a family member years ago where a lot of us in the family didn't even go to the funeral because we were afraid that the person who actually murdered the individual family member were going to be there shooting up, and they did. They came there and shot 4 other people. So I think it's all kinds of different things, a part of that. And I also just want to let you guys know, I think we just had joined on the line Officer Lily. I think he just joined, I'm not sure. Are you available, Officer Lily? Okay, I think he may be trying to get on. He's one of our Baltimore County officers. So that's just my take from just witnessing what I've seen on a personal basis. And like you said also, too, it is glamorization for a lot of young people. It makes them feel big and, powerful because they're carrying a firearm.
And I do think so. I think you got a really good point. I think you'll hear from a lot of our young people that they're carrying firearms for protection. And I think that's a more difficult one, more difficult nut to crack. But I do think that a fair number of our young people are carrying it because they think it's glamorous. And those are the cases where, what's happening in those cases, at least in Washington, D.C., the nature of our homicides, gun-related homicides, has actually changed over the last 15 years. So back 15 years ago, the majority of our firearms-related homicides was related to the drug trade. And it was protecting turf, and there was some purposeful murders associated with people not paying for drugs and that kind of thing. Now, the biggest increase in motives in our shootings have been these petty disputes where there's a firearm readily available. And I think that that's the area where we can be the most successful. If we can prevent that firearm being in that equation in the first place, I think that's how you prevent that category of shootings and homicides. I see so many cases where somebody gave somebody a bad look. There was a road rage incident. These spur of the moment things, and this gun is readily available by young people. And some of these young people have been introduced into the criminal justice system multiple times, but some of these young people have not, or some of them have only had like some minor offenses. And now they've pulled this gun out, they've used it, and they're going to face consequences that are going to impact them for the rest of their lives. I just think that that's the area that potentially there's area where we can be successful. Getting to those kids, those young people who picked up the gun for the wrong reason, and next thing you know, somebody's dead or somebody's shot.
Chief, how do you find that these kids get these guns? How do they get them?
In Washington, D.C., we're very unique. We don't manufacture or sell. We don't have any gun stores anywhere in the District of Columbia, but still, we have a gun problem. And so the guns that are coming in from mostly the way the guns come into the city, and Virginia is the largest source state. What will happen is somebody out in the state of Virginia will purchase a gun. They'll sell it to somebody here in the district, and then they'll report the gun either lost or stolen. That's called a straw purchase, and that's largely how the guns get into the city. And then the other thing that happens is oftentimes these guns are the same gun is rented around. So if somebody needs a gun, they know someone in the neighborhood they can go to. They can pay them a couple $100 and essentially rent the gun. They use the gun and then they bring it back.
Wow. That's amazing.
Chief Newsham, I was just curious, and I am, first of all, thank you so much, and I am intrigued. I was intrigued about the thought of stigmatizing, and I was just curious as to what extent already attempts have been made to have like focus groups or have some type of activity that would attract those young folk that tend to fall into the category that you identify, to use them as a source of information, to plan some type of program or provide some kind of incentive for them to share about their thoughts on how to stigmatize, how we might consider ways of stigmatizing the carrying of a gun, and as you have presented. I don't.
Yeah, I think go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that when I talk about peer pressure, I think that we have to convince the kids that are really, really concerned about this. And there's a lot of our kids. There's a lot of our kids that are going to school scared to death. You know what I mean? That they might come across somebody and they might get hurt as a result of that interaction. I think there's more of those kids than kids that are going to go out there and get into trouble. I truly believe that in my heart of hearts, that that's the situation we're dealing with. And if we could somehow get to that greater population of young people and get them to look at the people who are out there, carrying the guns, and just say, they're going to listen. The way that I look at it, they're going to listen to their peers probably more than they would ever listen to a teacher or a parent, and certainly more than they would ever listen to a police officer. I think there's always, at that age when they're young, there's a tendency to, especially if they're rebellious, is to not listen to the adults. So I think somehow we have to tap into those kids, those other kids, and get them to. And I think you'd have to probably talk to some experts. I think you would probably also have to get some people on board who are very high profile in the minds of our young people. So I don't know if that would be, people who are in the music business, famous actors and actresses, sports, people who are, really good at sports, to get them involved, because I think that there's a communication gap between a lot of the adults who are trying to work on this and the kids who are trying to get to listen.
Hey, Chief, can I slide in? This is Orlando Lilly, captain from the Baltimore County, and I have the community outreach. Basically, I'm just really going to kind of co-sign what the Chief is saying. And, Chief, more than anything, I really just want to thank you for being from a total different agency. Thank you for your commitment in looking at everything that we do in a holistic way. It is really, really powerful to hear you speak. But one of the things the Chief said, I just want to piggyback on what he just said. In New York has this program called NYC Together, by Dana Ratchlin, and the chief nailed it. What Dana did with NYC was she brought in some actors as well as some musicians, and as well as some of the teenagers from that. There were young kids who we consider sometimes some of the at risk, and I hate using that term because we're all at risk. But ultimately what happened when they brought those younger people in, they met with the Commissioner of New York, and the Commissioner of New York brought in his whole executive staff. And what the young people instantly told him was to stop talking to them about going to jail and stop talking to them about dying, because that didn't scare them. What they wanted was somebody to actually listen to the things that they were saying. Yeah. And at this time, and that commissioner has just since retired, what he did was he actually had them come up with what could they do to help with getting guns out the street.
Right. Yeah.
These kids drew up a whole program that New York ended up using. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't believe some of the things that they came up with that could actually be implemented. And so a lot of times, even though that we're in the profession, doesn't always make us have all the insight to some of the thoughts and processes that they have when some of these younger people are doing some of the things that we wish they wouldn't do. And once again, I'm going to piggyback on what the chief said again. And in many instances, those who are not more prone to get in trouble but exposed to it, they do outnumber that few. But they also know that there's, and for lack of a better term, they have to make sure that they can survive in their neighborhoods.
Right.
And I can tell you that because I'm living proof of that. And fortunately for me, I was an athlete, so many of those kids would not let me get in trouble because they figured that I had a way out. But I still didn't want them to exclude me because I didn't want to feel like I was an outcast in my own neighborhood. And it was somebody younger who came and touched me as well as a police officer at the same time. And that's why I'm here. So, Chief, I thank you so much for what you just said, and I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you. And, for those of you on the call who don't know this, our friends in Baltimore County are our true friends, and we would call on them in any instance. So I appreciate you making those comments.
Thank you, Chief.
Absolutely. And this is Georgia Dunston. I was asking a question earlier. So I was very much thankful for your answer. My follow-up question to that would be, do you know if some of that information that the New York group was able to collect, particularly some of those things that, for example, that you said were surprising and were clearly not expected, so to speak. Do you know if that information would be available to us?
Well, what I'll do is I'll do you even better. I'll put you in contact with Dana Ratchlin because I actually was trying to steal her from New York to bring her to Baltimore County because we do have a diversion program, but I was trying to figure out the ways to actually grow because actually when you look around the country, there's not a lot of agencies, and considering the number of agencies within the country that have a diversion program. So you can actually go to NYC Together. That's NYC Together. Look some of the information up on, because she does have a website. And what I'll do tonight, Danielle has my information, and I'll make sure that if you email me, I'll email all that information out so you can have direct contact with her directly.
Okay.
Realty. Thank you. Thank you so much, Orlando.
Yes. In fact,
and Dr. Myers, you guys met Orlando when we had the movie screening on Second Thought. And Orlando, what I wanted to ask you guys and the chief, that movie that we have about on Second Thought does talk about violence and it does have a gun involved. Do you think if we could get more marketing or more publicity to have young people watch that movie, do you think that's something that would kind of help with curtail the way they may think?
I believe, Chief, I think you have a copy of the film. I think we gave you one. I don't know if you had a chance to see it yet. This was one of the violence prevention films, and we'll get more copies down to you if you need one. But one of the things that Black Women for Positive Change does is try to produce violence prevention films. And that's what Danielle's referring to.
Did you? I did. I apologize for not having an opportunity to see it, but I think that those are the types of things when I'm thinking about stigmatizing this behavior. If there are people in the film who are all of our kids relate to, I think that that's a very powerful way to do it.
Okay, well, we'll make sure that we get a copy down to you so you can see what we produced. And we had a young man in the film who was known. He was in what's the name of that movie? He was in a popular show years ago, Trey Chaney, and the young people do recognize him. But you're absolutely right, Chief. The kids, they really need something else to dream about. We did a town hall with the chief of police in Pittsburgh a few years ago, and the kids told us the same thing. Stop talking to us about violence. You guys need to give us something to dream about. We don't have any dreams. So we just have to figure out, does DC government right at this time have the focus groups, and do you think there's a possibility we could interest the mayor in something like this?
I think that there are a lot of groups working out there, and my sense is a number of the groups are working in different directions. I think that a more collaborative approach on this is probably the best way to go. And I do think that this is something that the city would be very interested in.
Okay, well, we'll have to do some more talking about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is our chief of police in Baltimore County, I did mention to her at an event that we were at about what we were doing with de-escalation, and she seemed very much interested. So I could talk to Orlando, and maybe we can see if we can get something together where we can do it on another level, because even some of the things that he spoke about when we were at the movie screening, that could be something that we could work on. Maybe we can start doing some virtual stuff while everyone's home. And that could force people to have to look at some things.
Yes, this is Pastor Bowie, and I'd like to say that there's a great deal of great solutions, and some of the things that I think that we need. One of the best solutions I've heard is that we've got to listen to the children, because many times the answers start there, for us to be able to hear from them, and then also allow them to feel valued, because what happens is adults too often, we come with answers without ever engaging them or asking them. So one of the things that I've discovered, that if you will allow them to speak. Another thing with some of these young men and women, Chief, that, because all the kids are not bad. They make some dumb decisions as young kids because they just don't know any better. So some of those who unfortunately have kind of interrupted their lives due to these decisions, if we can somehow also make a video or be able to have them speak after they have made the decision and be able to communicate to their peers as well, I think is very important. And then also, I believe all of us would agree that the NRA, unfortunately, has too much of a stronghold and power on the politicians. And so that's where those of us as adults and as well as children have to come together and really go after that power and decentralize that power, I believe, is one of the things that we need to do. And last but not least, those video games desensitize these kids to killing, because the mind can't tell the difference between reality and fantasy. And we got to do something about that as well. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I think, Reverend, I think that's right. I think sometimes our young people are not listening to us because we're not listening to them. And I think that, I think that that two-way communication, listening to what they have to say, probably first, and then having figureheads that can communicate with them. I think if you do that, I truly believe you can have some progress here.
Chief Newsham, I think you just hit it on the nail. And doing something like that means it would be different levels. This Pastor Cole from Washington, D.C. I grew up in Ward 8. I've been in D.C. all my life. And the one thing, talking with our young people, a lot of things come from this bullying thing. Nowadays, like if something breaks out, like in school, back in the day when we were in school, it was whoever passed the first lick. You know, you got a suspension, maybe in. Now everybody goes down. And speaking with a lot of the parents, there's not a lot of communication going on. Everybody's running fearful and don't know how to solve issues. You got a lot of trauma in the homes, in our community. And, we get programs that come in, want to do a good thing, but after the program is over, there's nobody to stay there. There needs to be actual personal relationship building to a certain degree, where the door is open. We can talk about it. When I grew up, we had officer friendlies that actually were in the neighborhood that developed relationships with the families. And that's kind of been a breaking point. I was in the era when there was all that drug mess and up northwest, and they were shooting and acting real crazy. So I've seen up close and personal how stuff is, but it still goes to the basic of being able to communicate, be able to develop relationships, trusting relationships, and better explaining, being touchable. You can bring all the programs in and show all the movies, but there's nothing like when somebody can just sit down and talk with you and walk you through the steps and show you from a realistic point of view how things can change. Not making empty promises, but showing them you can do, we can do, we'll do this together. I think something like that needs to be developed.
Yeah, I think one of the points that you're making is that any initiative that you undertake has to be long term. I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we think we can just kind of walk in, do a quick presentation and walk out and hope that we're going to be able to impact these kids in a meaningful way. I think that it's something where you're going to have the ability to kind of, maybe wedge yourself into their thought process, and then you stay there. And I think that you're right. I think you have to have their trust to do that. But I think you have to go in there with the intention of this is not going to happen. This is not going to happen overnight. This is something that's going to take rolling up your sleeves and really being there for them in the long term and really giving them, I think that there are probably some times when our young people are thinking about making a decision before something really bad happens. And I think that if they had somebody to call, a peer, a mentor, to call on and say, hey, listen, this is what I'm thinking. This is why I'm angry. This has really got me upset. And to kind of talk them out of that situation. I think those are the types of resources that just don't seem to be available for our young people right now.
Yeah, I think we definitely have to build relationships with them. And like Orlando and the other young man said, listen to what they have to say. Building relationships.
Are there other questions that others would like to ask? Please speak up.
So do you think that drugs are not as important to the conflict as it once was? Or is it still an issue?
Yeah, I can only talk for DC, and every city is different. We still do have drug-related shootings. I don't want anyone to think that we don't. But the number of drug-related shootings in recent years has dropped dramatically. And the more prevalent types of shootings we're seeing are over very, very minor disputes. And those are, the drug issue from a law enforcement perspective was a little bit easier to deal with because you knew where the drugs were being sold. You knew how to impact the drug market. But when you're going to have a dispute that could erupt anywhere, and have a gunfight result from that dispute, those are harder to, at least from a law enforcement perspective, those are harder to identify. That's why I think we have to approach this by talking to all of our young people. Anyone who could potentially get themselves into that bad situation, and somehow convince them to do something different.
Well, I'm not aware of what's going on in DC schools, but I do want to pick up where I grew up with Officer Friendly too, and when Officer Friendly would come in, all of us would just go and hug him. Just loved Officer Friendly. I was just wondering, when do police go to the schools? Do they go regularly, or how does that work? Are they there? Except when there's a reason of violence or something. I mean, do they get to know them? Do they interact with the kids in the school?
So it's interesting. When I became the chief in 2016, and I started going to meetings across the city, I've been a police officer in DC for 30 years. But one of the things when I became the chief, at every single meeting I went to, regardless of what ward in the city, there was always somebody who stood up, and they were usually older, and they would say, I remember when we used to have Officer Friendly. So what we did, swear to God, honest to God, true. So what we did actually in DC is we brought the Officer Friendly program back. So we go into all of the elementary schools. Unfortunately, school is out now, but we go in and we give presentations at the elementary school level to our kids about, just safety on the internet, nonviolence, those types of trainings. And then at the end of the day, we actually we've developed a side-by-side band, which is all uniformed police officers. And they play for the kids. And I got to tell you, that's been very well received by our young people.
It is.
And I do think that it's starting to paint a better image of the police, because they look at the police in that scenario, they look at them as human beings and not as, the bad guy or, the guy who's going to go out there and just arrest people. They look at them, particularly when they're playing the music, they look, that's a regular person. That's a human being. And so I do think that's one of the positive things over time where we're going to have an impact on our kids. But I also think there's a lot of other things that we could be doing.
Right, because it's those of us, we can't forget it. It must have really been an impact. You always, have people of the older generation. We still think about that.
Well, that's what I thought too. Every time I heard it, I'm like, this was really impactful on people. People remember this, so that's why I thought it was important that we bring it back.
For the past 9 years, Chief, we have had a week of nonviolence for the past 9 years. And listening to what you're saying, our week of nonviolence comes up in October. Maybe we could have a big town hall meeting like we had with the chief of police in Pittsburgh with several hundred kids and let them talk. And maybe that's something that you would be willing to be part of, and we could have a celebrity and our organization, and we could let the kids talk. What do you think about something like that?
It sounds like a great idea. We could also get our side-by-side band out there for you if you want to do it in the district.
Oh, wow, that sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, in Baltimore County, we have what we call a JOINS program, Juvenile Offenders in Need of Supervision. And actually it's something that the whole state of Maryland now wants to duplicate because we've had a 98% success rate. The problem, though, because of the Maryland laws, only certain kids qualify to be in the program, and normally there's those kids who commit those classified misdemeanors. And so to answer the other question, we have the SRO program. So we do have officers in the school, but oftentimes the officers in the school may not mirror exactly what happens with officers in patrol. And so the good thing about the chief that's the chief on phone now is the fact that he understands, and I'm going to say this because the chief has to be a little bit more diplomatic than Orlando, but I'm a firm believer that when the head's sick, the body is sick. So if you don't have someone at the head that believes in this, there's a million things that the chief has on his plate that you all probably have no clue of, but he took time this evening to get on this phone call. It speaks volumes. Every chief, and he's one of the major city chiefs in the country. So when you have the right person in place, it's not just about having an officer in the precinct or an officer in the district or an officer in the school. You have to have an officer. You have to have someone at the head of the organization who believes this and don't just say it when it's convenient and it's the most nicest thing to say because it's the appropriate thing to say in the right crowd. You'll see those things that'll be actually practiced in a police department from there. So when we say use those terms, officer friendly, every officer should be friendly. What I challenge people to do, and I'm going to challenge you all to do this tonight, is once a month, what I make myself to do after 26 years on the job is I make myself go back and read my oath. That is how I keep myself in check about why I came on this job. It wasn't to ultimately be called Captain Lilly or the salary, because when I came on, the salary wasn't that great. It was really because I had someone who served me and stayed such a part of my life that was a promise that I made that when I grew up, I was going to do the same thing that he did. And if you don't have people who are truly committed, and what that means is that the questions that you all are asking the chief, these are the questions that you should have before somebody even get on the job and hire the chief, because that'll tell you everything about what they're doing. And so oftentimes what I tell the community is we ask a lot of the wrong questions. Not that they're bad questions, but the wrong questions. And so some of the things that you all are bringing out right now, you're preaching to the choir. Chief is all in. He's all in. The key is to get us all synced on the same board. Baltimore County is in. Baltimore City is in. But it doesn't mean that you always have all the right people in the right place, and that takes time over a period of time, and it takes involvement from the community. Because what I normally tell people is you have to remember that any given time there's only a certain number of officers on the street. Then you have to put into that calculation the calls of service and the types of calls, how they get prioritized. That's why I'm a big advocate for people going through citizens academies for police departments who put them on, so you can really have a better understanding of how police work works, so people can understand that police departments are resources for your community. They are not the final key to make your community's community. You have to make your community.
Well, we appreciate your comments, Officer Lilly. And we do want to, we know the chief's time is really tight. And Reverend Bowie, we want to just thank Chief Newsham for coming on with us this evening. But Chief, do you have any closing remarks? Because we really do appreciate the 45 minutes that you spent with us. We'll probably stay on a little bit after you leave and talk about this some more. But I
no, absolutely. I really do appreciate that. I've formed a really great relationship with Dr. Myers in recent years. I'm absolutely convinced that she is committed to finding a way to reduce the violence, and I think that I have learned so much from her in our discussions. When you have people like Captain Lilly, when you have people like the folks that we have on the call who are sitting here spending their time while we're in a public health emergency that we haven't seen in 100 years, but you all are still committed to ensuring that you have these discussions about reducing violence. That makes me want to go to work tomorrow. It encourages me that we have people out there that are really committed to doing this. And I think that, accomplishing this is really more about doing the work than anything else. And to know that we have you out there really, really makes me feel good. So I appreciate that. The last thing I will say is that I'm going to urge all of you for the next couple of weeks anyways, stay at home, stay healthy, and God bless you. And if you get this thing together in Washington, D.C., where we can get, 100 or a couple hundred kids in the same place, and we can have a positive impact on them, I can tell you that the Metropolitan Police Department will be all in on that idea.
Oh, that's fabulous. That is exciting. Well, you're wonderful. We appreciate you. And Reverend Bowie, our co-chair, Reverend Bowie, I think Chief Newsham's getting ready to leave us this evening, but thank you so much. And
all right, good night. And looking forward, Captain Lilly, to meeting you soon.
Yes, sir.
So, pleasure meeting you And God bless all of you, and we're praying for you too.
I thank you so much. We need that.
Thank you very much.
Really, yes, very much. Thank you. And please don't hang up everybody else. We want to just stick around for a few more minutes.